Each day, I strive to be 1% better than I was yesterday. And that's whether through reading a book, getting a coach, or researching and learning something to help me get better and move closer towards my goals while still doing less. Essentially, I do this to make my best even better. And I want my employees' best to be even better as well. Recently, I was introduced to Brian, who deeply believes there's only one thing keeping you and your employees from being your best self, and it's the trash from your past. These are the things that you try to escape time and time again, the things you shove down and try to avoid, run from, and forget. I am Shanice Miller, and welcome to my podcast, Do Less. Yes, that's right, do less. It used to be cool to work 60 hours a week, but the world has gotten smarter and realized why spend more time to make the same or less money. I help small business owners build systems and processes to help them scale and find more time for themselves and their families. I'm going to provide you the best practices and all the tools and tips to scale your business. Welcome to my show. So, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show.
I'm excited to be here. We had a really great conversation on my show the other day. You got real, raw, opened up, told parts of your story, and I'm looking forward to coming in and contributing back.
Yes. I'm really excited for this, especially since I know how deep you go. so, so, when was the moment that you first realized the trash from your past was keeping you stuck?
Ooh, there have been many moments, but the very first one that I became aware of was when I was 27.
Why was that?
And 27 was it was 20 years after a pretty revolutionary, traumatic story that we may get into, we may not. But I had been chasing what the world had told me to chase, which was all the whats. What house, what car, what amount of money, right? When in reality, 7 years prior at 20, I had another accident and injury that allowed me to realize how disconnected and alone I was. And I was really in seek of who, right? Like who I was and connection and human connection at the deepest level. And at 27, we had a $10 million business that was growing. And I realized I woke up and I had all the whats I'd ever wanted, house, car, wife, kids on the way, but it cost me who I was. And I looked around in the circles that I was running in with multiple people and multiple entrepreneurs making multiple 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures in some cases. And I wasn't the only one that was feeling disconnected, empty, and alone. And it told me there was something probably better on the other side. And I've been unpacking that now for the last 11, 12 years.
What was it about that accident that made you realize you were so alone?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of backdrop on the original story because it'll bring context to this. When I was 7, I was run over by a truck.
Wow.
And my left arm was completely severed from my body. It was reattached. I had 24 surgeries, years of adversity.
Wow.
And I'll save some of the details in the beginning just because of the structure and length of the show. But the reality of it is I had to form a very strong mindset and a very strong mental awareness and mental toughness because I needed to survive. I needed to grow. I needed to heal. But I was also already getting narratives from the world that my truth wasn't going to be accepted, that other people were going to limit me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation. And so I, from 7 to 20, that 13 years, had this really strong mental toughness narrative, which was Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And by the way, my friend, I did some really epic shit in those 13 years that like blew my mind. And I was trying to prove to the world, but really prove to myself that this accident was going to hold me back. At 20, I had a snowboarding injury and I re-broke this arm and I almost lost it again. I went 10 months with it hanging by my side. I went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me because of medical malpractice. And I got into the deepest, darkest, most depressed state I'm aware of as an adult in my life so far. I was surrounded by people, but I was completely alone. And what I want to be really clear on is no one was there to help me. Now, I want to be really clear. That wasn't about them. There was moments of resentment in those moments. But when I sat with it and really understood, my narrative was so powerful, the world just bought into it, right? Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. But what they added to it was, and if he needs help, he'll ask for it. But I find myself at 20 in my most vulnerable period I'd ever been in, not having the courage to ask for help. And so then I shifted my whole focus towards human connection, right? Which I believe vulnerability and authenticity are the glue that binds human connection. So that's what I started to focus on for that next period. But legitimately, I also was in seek of who and human connection. And now what I realize is in that seek to 27 is that my unconscious mind was saying, well, maybe if I built a life of significance, a life of meaning, a life that people admire, that maybe they'll just want to be around me. Right. And it was at 27 when I woke up that I realized that that's just a misnomer, a lie, and that's not how the world works.
Wow. That's really incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that's something that, it's hard and it's a struggle to go in and say, I am strong. I can do this. I can overcome anything. And then to feel really alone. How were you able to finally start asking for help, or were you able to finally start asking for help?
Absolutely, but it's still a muscle I'm flexing and trying to continue to strengthen, right? Like I got really used to being the one that helped others.
Mm.
And so it was really hard for me to help myself. It also was one of those things where the more I focused on others, the less I had to focus on me, right? It was also, the idea that I sometimes didn't feel worthy of asking for the help. I didn't want to bother someone, burden someone. There are times that I had fear of judgment and criticism for asking for help on something that I believed that I should know or should be capable of or whatever. And the other side of it is, and this is what really smacked me up against the head. I'll tell you, right when I had that awareness at 27, I hired my first coach not long after. And I say this because I'm forever indebted to this man. I interviewed 14 coaches and I hired him. He was the 14th coach. And the first 13 were an inch deep and a mile wide and had no relevance, no credibility, no impact in my life.
Mm.
And this guy just resonated at a deep level. And it was the first month working with him that he said, Brian, you have to be doing this. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, you help people all the time. You speak on stages. You have been for 20 years. Like, why would you not make this a profession and get paid for it? And I was like, yeah, buddy. I'm paying you a lot of money to not tell me how great I am, but to help me figure out this other shit. So fuck off. Like, no. And I ignored it. But I was leaning into asking for help and opening myself to allowing an outside lens to now reflect back to me what I was capable of, what my potential was, in a way that he saw me in a way that I didn't see myself at the time. And I've had many critical moments like that. But I'm still asking for help. It was 2.5 years ago. I asked a mentor, what's my biggest blind spot? And he goes, you suck at receiving and asking for help. This was 2.5 years ago after I'd been already working on it for almost a decade. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, Brian, I've witnessed you. I've watched you. If you are doing something which is absolutely clear for the benefit of someone else, nothing will stop you from asking for help.
Wow.
I mean, I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars, helped shape philanthropic organizations. And I don't say that to impress. By the way, my shame at one point wouldn't even allow me to say any of that because I felt I needed to apologize for the cool, good things I did. Mm. But the reality of it is now I face myself just 2.5 years ago. And he's saying, Marian, what you need to understand is anything that flows through you, anything that benefits you will benefit everyone else because of the way you live your life. And I had never connected the dots on that because if it was to benefit me, I wouldn't ask. But I never had a problem asking for other people. So I'm still working on it, to be transparent. But, last week I challenged that muscle and I reached out to 8 different people on a very specific problem that showed up in my life that I was reaching out to ask for their opinion, for their help, their advice, or their structure. And of the 8 people I reached out to, 6 of them responded within 30 minutes and 5 of them I spoke with within less than 24 hours, right? So what I'm now starting to also realize is when I ask and I'm open to receive, the answer is always on the other side. It's just about finding where and how or who to find it.
Mm. I think you said 2 really important things there that I heard. And especially I hear time and time again, like, I don't want to bother or bug someone. And even with people who I've seen hiring employees, I don't want to bother or bug this person. And so I'm going to just do it myself. And I think that's something really powerful to touch on and to really highlight so that it's like you're not alone, but you're also not bothering anyone by asking for help. Because
it's a powerful point, but even to the point of what you just said, as someone who hires people, yeah. I have had people that I am paying to do certain very specific jobs. And yet there are still times that I'm like, I don't want to ask or I don't want to challenge. Now, by the way, that's been coming out of my leadership bucket for the last 15 to 20 years. It's layers that I've been shedding. But it's about really understanding as well the difference between armor and boundaries. Because I believe that armor protects pain, right? So our hesitancy to ask, our belief that we're not worthy, the thing that we're going to be causing disruption to their life or whatever, right? Like that is 100% connected to what's happening. But we also have to put ourselves in a position where we can guide, lead, and be vulnerable and show that we don't have all the answers. We don't know, but armor protects pain. So armor is protecting all of that.
Mm.
Boundaries are a communicated contract that exists based on your clear existence. So if as a leader, we know who we are, we know what we're worth, we know what we're good at, what we're not good at, the areas that we need support, the areas that we know we need to leverage other people's talents, all of the deficiencies that exist within us, we don't have to be guarded, armored, or protected for asking for help any longer. It's just recognizing who we are. And hey, by the way, in exchange for the compensation I'm giving you, these are the very clear expectations of performance.
Yes.
And here's how I'm going to hold you accountable over that time. Armor doesn't allow you to create accountability, but boundaries do.
I like how you put it that way because it's a very clear and upfront and direct. And that's what I found as well. When you are giving your employees very clear directions, instructions, boundaries, even with your own clients, that's when the magic happens. When you're not stressed, you're not, trying to hurry up and give someone more, giving them the whole kitchen sink, as I've heard a bunch of times. And you're saying, like, this is what I promised. This is what I'm going to deliver. Same with employees, same with the clients. And everyone can feel safe and comfortable knowing that, I know exactly what it is that I need to do.
Yeah.
The other important thing was that you went through 13 coaches. And I know, like, I was in that moment as well before when I first started off. I got a coach and it wasn't really, I probably had no business paying that much for a coach just starting off in business. And it also wasn't the right coach for me. And so that's a hard pill to swallow, especially when you've invested a certain amount of money over the time of 13 coaches to say, I'm going to jump out there, move past fear, and get another coach. And I mean, I did get more coaches after that, but that fear was still there. So
what I'll clarify is I interviewed 14. I only hired one.
Okay.
So I maybe wasn't as clear on that, but I think that here's what almost happened though. I was so jaded by the end of the 13th interview that I almost shut down the concept of asking for further help and going to find that coach.
What made you jaded?
Because there was a lot of people that were an inch deep and a mile wide that I could see through their lack of congruence, their lack of authenticity, the way they were repackaging the same freaking narratives that are in every book that I could buy, but weren't really in a place where they were going to seek to understand and align for me. It was about, oh, I've learned this system, or I learned this, I became a certified coach in this. And so it was very like targeted, but they didn't have the dynamic nature that really allowed them to help me become the best version of me in every area of my life. And that's what I was looking for was, right, I was still burning the candle at both ends at the time. I was starting to have kids and I wasn't readjusting my life. I wasn't being as active and present in all the moments that I wanted. I was still in build mode, but build mode from an unhealthy shame-based perspective, which was just do all the time and not really understand how to live. And so like he was the only person that like really had some context and understanding and relevance, both in a personal trauma and tragedy to be able to understand the emotional side, but also had legitimate business success. You realize at 27, I had built a $10 million business with my partners. My personal contribution at that point was $2-3 million of revenue. My personal book was larger than 99% of individual agencies in the business. And I don't say that to impress. I say it to impress upon the point. I had achieved a level of understanding, wisdom, and experience, even at a young age at 27, that I made more money than the first 13 coaches I'd ever talked to. And I'm like, if I, and at that time, that's how I was measuring all my success too, was just money. So it was like through the lens of like, wait a minute, I'm making 5 times as much as you. How are you going to be able to help me?
I was just going to ask you, like, how in the world were you that perceptive at 27? Because I want to emphasize that it's 27. It's still a young age and you've had so much experience, but to say like, I need something more than just this dollar amount. And that, I think that's amazing because I've heard so many times people strive for 1 million. I want to be 7-figure, 8 figures. And it's just like, what does that come with? What does that entail? Does that really help you to live your rich life the way you want it to live? Or are you just striving for a particular target number?
Yeah. And here's the reality. Like, I want to be really clear. I in zero way vilify money. I've made a lot of money in my life. I plan to make a lot more money in my life. And I want every single person to make as much money as they absolutely can and will support the lifestyles that they want. What I'm not a fan of is this concept and this idea, which is this new trend that everybody needs to be a billionaire or you haven't made it, right? Like this hustle culture mentality, because the reality of it is we know that 99% of people never even make $250,000 a year, but yet the new standard for having made it is a billionaire, right? Like the concept of that is so extreme. I've had people sit in my chair on my podcast that are worth 250 million. 250 million, that's 25% of the way to a billion. And yet it's still more money, more time freedom, more opportunity than 99.9% of the world will ever be able to even wrap their heads around. And so I'm like, look, I've coached people that were making tons of money running multiple operations, and they decided that what was going to make them happy was making $85,000 a year as a firefighter, but that was fulfilling who they were. Again, it wasn't about money. It was about the alignment and what was the money doing to produce the life they wanted.
Okay. I definitely get that part. So what did that coach specifically say or do to get you to flip your own lid and fix it?
Yeah, what I will say is that coach really helped me understand a lot more awareness, a lot more intentionality in a variety of areas of my life.
How?
It allowed Yeah, he challenged me to start visioning forward in a way that I hadn't in years.
Okay.
You see, I had always set all my goals around the age of 30. Literally, I was like, I'm going to make this amount of money. I'm going to have this kind of house. I'm going to be here in my life. Like all of it was around, I'm going to be done having kids by the time I'm 30. Like all of it.
I think that's a lot of ours, like goalposts. It's like by 30, you
Totally,
should
right?
be able to accomplish the world.
That was literally what it was. But here's the reality. I had also fallen into the seduction of success at the time, right? I was making a lot more money than I ever thought I would. And I had checked every box with the exception of being done having kids by the time I was 30, by the time I was 27.
Okay.
Right? Now, I had my daughter a week after my 30th birthday. So I was done a week after my 30th birthday. But the reality of it is like, I was lost in that time because that's all I knew. That's all I was chasing. But it's also, I still was feeling empty. So what did he do? He helped me reinvent and actually future forward envision my legacy. Like, what is my reason for existing? What are some of those crazy things that I want to accomplish? And then we started to build a framework for being able to actually do that, both into a quarterly and monthly and daily practice that allowed me to show up as a better version of myself. You know, what he did for me at that time was not give me the depth of emotional understanding and healing that I ultimately needed to become who I am, where I am, and how I coach today. But he reinforced a lot of the mindset and discipline pieces that had lacked as I fell into the seduction of success. When you don't reinvent the next pillar, the next goal mark, the next thing. And to me, that's not just for the lens of like more, but it's like when we get stagnant, we lose creativity, we lose passion, we lose connection. We start to just shrink.
Yeah.
And that was something that I was starting to feel and become aware of. And he helped me escape a lot of that by reimagining who Brian was going to become.
I deeply believe in the same. And I like the fact, especially that you said it's not just a one-time thing, because you had clear targets when you turned 30, and that's why you hit them. And I think so many people downplay or don't realize how important it is to have clear targets in your life so that you know you're working towards something, and that's what you are doing each day to hit them. And then to pivot as well to say like, okay, I hit those targets. Now what do I do next? Because that's a big part of what we do when we're working with our clients, which are, we do these action plans and they're 90-day sprints so that we are knowing, okay, this 90 days, we are wanting to get and grasp and go to this area in our business. These are the things that we need to do. This is how we're going to move towards it. And then the next 90 days, you can reevaluate, you can pivot, you can say, maybe I didn't quite like what I was finding. And it's not taking a whole year, 2 years, 5 years out of your lifetime. You're pivoting in these 90-day sprints. So I think that's so important that you highlight it. So what is a system that you use when coaching people to help motivate and inspire employees to reach peak performance?
Yeah, so I invented and developed the waste to wealth method, which is 5 pillars that are guaranteed to identify and remove or transform the waste in every individual and organization to maximize the wealth generating opportunities that will connect and convert in their lives and businesses. So these 5 pillars are things that can apply into individuals, and they're things that can apply directly into businesses. And I'll give you some framing on those 5 in just a second. But one thing that I really have to acknowledge, because I did say that he only helped me really on that mental conditioning and discipline side, the waste to wealth method came through need in my own life to unpack some things. And I think it's important that I address this before I talk about the method so that people can understand the relevance and why. Even though I'd hired a coach and was doing these things, I was still operating from an intellectual capacity almost alone in my life.
Oh.
And it wasn't until I was 32 playing with my daughter, and we're laying on the couch, and she reaches her arm around my neck after we've been playing and laughing and kisses me on the cheek, and she says, "Dada, I love you." And I broke down in tears, Shanice. And I want to be really clear. I think men who cry, it's actually a sign of strength. I envy it. I conditioned tears out of myself a long time ago, and I've been trying to reconnect to them. But as I'm crying in that moment, in joy, which I'd never experienced. I've never understood that. I'm like, why would somebody cry when they're happy, right? Like, it never connected for me because of the way I experienced the world and where my emotions were. And it made me realize that if I was experiencing that in that way, then every other emotion I was experiencing was pale in comparison. And it meant I probably wasn't feeling. And here's where it led me, Shanice. I realized that when I shut off physical pain right after my accident, I also shut off mental pain, spiritual pain, and most importantly, emotional pain for 20 to 25 years, and I didn't realize it. So I told you I was going on this path around human connection, around vulnerability and authenticity, but this is also then what I realized. Human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. And it was that next period of time, really the last 5 to 7 years, that I had to really effectively unpack the deep level of shame that I was operating under. And after I executed my buy, sell in my last business in 2020 to go do this full time to help people get to the core of who they are, it was less than a year later that my wife and I sat on our back patio, and she went on to tell me that things I'd done in our relationship, marriage, life, and business over the last 14 years had contributed to her losing who she was. And we unpacked a deep level of anger within me that I didn't even realize was there. It was buried so deep it could barely be excavated. Why do I tell you this? Because the concept of waste and trash had to go from flipping my own lid and actually going in and going through these 5 pillars so that I could ensure that the 3 people and the only 3 things that I care most about, which are my wife and my 2 kids. See, being a husband and a father is the only thing binary for me in my world. Okay. If they're not good, I walk away from everything, right? But all of a sudden, I'm in this position where I'm going out to help the world do this, and I didn't know if I was going to be married for another month. And I realized all the damage I'd created in my own household because of all the areas that I was blind.
Wow.
I realized all the areas I'd actually historically created damage in prior relationships, friendships, employees, clients. I realized that the way that I'd been focusing on relationships and connection was flawed because it was surface level and intellectual only. And so that's where the waste to wealth method came from, because, I would have situations like this at work. I'd go in and I'd have a multi-billion-dollar client that had 10 different buyers involved. It took me a year to get them all at the table for us to get hired to deploy the team in. But guess what? I'm loud and I talk fast. I don't fit the corporate world in the normal sense, right? But we'd be sitting in the $2 billion client's office with all their executive team, and my team would lean over and be like, "Shh, Brian, you can't talk so fast. You can't talk so loud." And immediately I'd shrink and I'd bite my tongue and I'd feel like my words weren't worthy, even though I was the one responsible for everyone being in that room.
Yeah.
Right? Like, think about that. That's crazy. And then my wife would say something like, "Hey, honey, what are we going to do with the kids this weekend?" But my shame filter would cause me to hear it this way. "Hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently. So what are you going to do about it to make up for it this weekend?" And then I'd get defensive and I'd get all heated and I'd rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last 4 days to show her I'm a good husband and father. That wasn't even what she asked.
Yeah.
The reality of it is both of those situations were trash from my past that were causing me to react to the moment in front of me that had nothing to do with the moment in front of me and everything to do with the trash from my past.
Yeah.
And so what I want all organizations and people to understand is the trash from your past, the trash within your organization, is not your fault. It's generationally patterned, inherited, conditioned down, but it does become your responsibility once you become aware of it or you start burying others in your trash. And so now what I'm doing is really helping people understand the way to connect at the deepest level by understanding the areas they're blocking it within themselves so they can grow, connect, and convert in their lives and businesses through the waste to wealth method.
Nice. I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Can you just hit on those 5 pillars really quickly for me? Because I know I'm dying to hear them. But I do love the fact that you put in there how one person hears what one person says isn't necessarily what that person says. Because that's so powerful, especially when we are dealing with ourselves, employees. Like, what we are saying and communicating might not be understood or heard or interpreted how you're trying to deliver it based on the person's past. So what are
That's
those?
exactly right.
Yeah, what are those 5 pillars?
Yeah, so the 5 pillars, and I'm gonna go through them fast. And again, you guys know I'm talking fast, so if you need to slow this down so that you can listen to it all, great, go for it. But the first is awareness. And it might seem intuitive and cliche that it's there, but we cannot be aware of what we're not intentional with. But what I want to be clear on with this awareness is this is not just becoming more aware of all the ways you should be judging yourself. This is about seeing yourself, understanding how you're feeling, what it means, the intellectual and emotional narratives that are allowing you to better understand yourself so you can show up in more situations objectively and non-judgmentally, right? Because if there's blame and shame from the first gate out of awareness, then all we're doing is perpetuating the same freaking cycle of low frequency, negative emotions. And it starts with us. How many times do we wake up and say, I should have gotten up earlier. I should have eaten better yesterday. I should have worked out, right? Like, should the shame-based word. So we need to remove that out of the gate. Ownership is the second pillar. And I want to be clear, these pillars aren't linear. They're more of like an infinity that weave back in and out of each other that are applicable in different moments.
Okay.
Ownership is really, really critical because when we react, because we are protective and armored, we create damage, right? Ownership is also creating repair in the damage that's been created. And so it's really understanding that it's like, how do I put myself into a position of an ownership and create the narrative and the perspective that allows me to see where I contributed to the situation ahead of me and how the other person's perspective could have been existing. So when we unpacked my anger, right, I had to take ownership and I went and created repair and I sat down with her parents like within 3 days and took complete ownership for what had happened, divides that existed in our relationship because of my anger and separation. And her dad looked at me and reinforced one of the most important lessons I've ever taught my son. Her dad looked at me and he goes, you talk too much, show me. The world will never judge you based on your intent. They will always judge you based on your actions. And so if you are feeling not seen, not understood, misunderstood by people in your life, ask the question, what is my intent and how is it actually being delivered? Because the reality of it is it's somewhere in that protective armored energy that the message is getting diluted, okay? Ownership's important. The next is unpack. Unpack is really doing that, unpacking and digging to find the source or source of that trash. What we find is that within that trash, we also find our treasure. Because often the treasure is formed from all the trash pressure. It's in those same moments. We talked about that the other day with your situation with your dad and the good things and the areas that you created patterns that you weren't necessarily aware of. But understanding those and the intellectual, emotional narratives that are around them help you actually get to the source so you can pluck it out and remove it and move on. The fourth is flip the lid. And what does that mean? That means literally in any moment, you can flip your lid and look at what's risen to the top objectively and non-judgmentally. Lay it all out in the light, understand it. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What is that doing? This is a practice to be done in the moment, but it's also a practice that can be done at the end of the day. So in the moment, it looks like this. Now, if my wife says something to me and I don't hear it clearly, or I feel that reactionary armored energy come in, I can just diffuse and put awareness, ownership, unpacking, and flipping the lid into that moment by saying something like, hey, honey, I just felt triggered by what you said, which tells me I probably didn't hear you correctly. Could you please restate it at a different time? And if I can't hear you or neutralize my energy, maybe we can pause this discussion and come back to it later so that we can be more successful in it, right? I've just literally removed all the energy and I've removed and prevented the damage so I don't have to expend extra energy creating repair, right? Flipping the lid also is a practice I say to the end of every day. We all take the trash out in our house and business every day, otherwise it gets heavy and stinky. But we don't clear or identify the trash that we've picked up throughout our days inside ourselves. Those moments we felt defeated, unworthy, not understood, those moments we felt objectified, those moments we felt criticism or judgment or shame, right? What happens is if we go to sleep with that, stage 3 REM sleep does memory consolidation, and it actually commits that further to a cellular memory moving forward than if you identify and remove it each night so that you don't carry it forward, okay? And the last is move. This is how does it move through us? How does it move through our world so we can move through it? I told you about shame and how it moved through my body to cause me to shrink, right? And how ultimately anger, which is a secondary emotion byproduct of shame, caused me to explode on my wife. It's the same core emotion, but it showed up in my body completely differently. I have 5 or 6 different ways that shame moves through my body and 5 or 6 different ways that anger moves through my body. Until I know the physiological pattern of what that looks like, I can't start to understand myself in the place to escape the pattern. Because once I now know how that looks, I can see how it moves through my world, i.e. the moments I get triggered or people trip over my trash or I trip over my own trash, right? I have over 50 shame triggers that I'm aware of and over 60 anger triggers that I'm aware of. Why is that important? Because if our doorbell rings and my 2 chihuahuas start going off and my sensory overload puts me into that heightened, energetic sensory overload state that feels like anger, frustration, and one of my 2 special needs kids comes and jumps in my lap right after that, what energy do you think they're going to get?
Oh, not good.
Right? And so here's the reality. Same thing. We get into an almost car accident and then we go in and we're leading a team meeting. If we haven't processed that, removed the armor, removed the energy that's associated, what do you think our teams are getting?
Yeah.
Right? It's the same thing. It's about how are we presenting ourselves? Because when we know that pattern, that's when we can pause in those moments and move through it by asking ourselves just 2 questions, right? Is what I'm reacting to right now due to the trash from my past or what's right in front of me? Here's a little hint. 99% of the time, it's going to be the trash from your past. And then the second question is, what am I protecting right now? Because if you're not clear on that, you won't know how to further evaluate how to move through this. And as a business, the same things show up, right? They can be systems, they can be processes, they can be lack of culture, they can be lack of conversion to teams, they can be lack of retention of our clients because of this pattern of how we're being reactionary as a business, right? We have to understand these things because it's the only way to connect at the deepest level with ourselves, with our employees, with our most intimate partners, with our clients, and with our communities.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing that. What am I reacting to and what am I protecting? Those are very 2 important questions. And I believe those questions will help you to do less in your life. So tell everyone, how can we follow you, find you, get help from you?
Yep. If you're a web person, you can go to brianbogert.com. If you're on social media, at Bogert Brian on any channel. And we've got a whole variety of free resources, things to direct help. We're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible by reducing the level of suffering. The only way we do that is if we move more people and get more trash moved out. So we're here to help. Let us know how. And thank you, my friend, for having me with you today.
This has been an amazing episode of Do Less with me, Shanice Miller. Share this episode with anyone who needs to hear this today. Leave a 5-star rating and review. And remember, if you're an entrepreneur and need to do less in your business, click the link in the description to work with me.